On PS37, the topic is provision, contingent, liability, and assets. Okay, first of all, what is provision? Provision is an existing liability of uncertain timing and certain amount. This essence of a provision is that there is uncertainty about the timing or amount of the future expenditure. It is the uncertainty that distinguishes provisions from other liabilities. The liability definitely exists at the end of reporting period, but the amount is indefinite, or the date when the obligation is due is also indefinite. And in some cases, the payee cannot be identified or determined. So actually, a provision may be the equivalent of an estimated liability that is accrued because it is both probable and measurable. In some cases, the provision providing or supplying of something, especially of food or other necessities, arrangement or preparation beforehand, or a measure or other means for meeting a need, a supply or stock of something provided. The present obligation may be legal or constructive. The definition of a legal obligation is fairly clear. Ibig sabihin ay patas po. A legal obligation is an obligation arising from a contract, legislation, or other operation of law. A constructive obligation exists when the entity has a stated policy that created a valid expectation that it will accept certain responsibilities from an established pattern of a practice. Probable outflow of economic benefits. For provision to qualify for recognition, there must be not only a present obligation but also a probable outflow of economic benefits to settle the obligation. An outflow of resources is regarded as probable if the event are more likely than not to occur, meaning the probability that the event will occur is greater than the probability that it will not occur. Probable means more than 50% likely to occur. Then possible means 50% or less likely to occur. Then remote means 10% or less likely to occur, or very slight occurrence. Reliable statement. From the word reliable, what comes first in your mind? For me, reliable is yung makatotohanan. The use of estimates is an essential part of the preparation of financial statements and does not undermine their reliability. Ibig sabihin, yung mga estimated sa preparation mo ng financial statements is hindi naman siya ganun kinoconsider as not reliability because estimated comes from your profits or yung matutubo mo sa mga products na ibebenta mo. So, estimate the product that you need, especially the financial statements. Kapag yung pag-estimate mo ay hindi makatotohanan, hindi daw mare-recognize yung liability. Example, bumili ka ng 1 kilong harina, tapos yung ingredients nun, mga kukunti lang rin, tapos ang estimated nun is makakagawa ka lang ng 50 mini donuts. Tapos yung inilagay mo naman sa estimated na magagawa mo is 100 pieces. So, hindi yun mare-recognize na liability kasi sobrang layo sa mismong magagawa mo na mini donuts. Measurement of provision. The amount recognized as a provised to settle the B estimate of the expenditure required to settle the press obligation of the end or obligation at the end of reporting period. The best estimate is the amount that an entity would rationally pay to settle the obligation at the end of reporting period. Where this is a continuous range of possible outcomes of each point, and each point in the range is as likely as any other. The midpoint of the range is the best estimate. Where a single obligation is being measured, the individual most likely outcome adjusted for the effect or other possible outcomes may be at the best estimate. Where the provision being measured involves a large population of items, the obligation is estimated by weighting all possible outcomes by their associated possibilities. Okay, ito naman yung measurement considerations. These are the following items are taking into consideration in recognizing and measuring a provision. First of all, the risks and uncertainties. Siyempre, kailangan mo namang mag-take ng risks. Yun naman yung first way sa lahat ng kinoconsider natin, mapa-company or in real life. Second is the present value of obligation. Of course, considerations pa rin yung nangyayari or yung kasalukuyan na nangyayari. The third one is the future events. Kagaya ng sinabi ko kanina, yung mga estimated mo, kailangan mo namang isipin agad kung ano yung katapusan ng ginagawa mo sa present mo ngayon. Ano bang future mo? Ano bang future ng company mo? Ano bang future na magagawa mo? The fourth one is the expected disposal of assets. Ibig sabihin, ano ba raw yung expected na pagmamayari mo ang kaya mag-sacrifice. And then the fifth one is the reimbursements, yung kaya mong ipambayad. And then, for number 6 is the changes in provision, yung pagbabago ng provision is kino-considered rin. Yung number 7, use of provision, yung paggamit, napakahalaga nun. And then yung future operation losses. I-considered mo rin daw yung sa hinaharap, yung mga losses, operating losses mo. And then, the last one is onerous contract. So, let's tackle more about the 9 measurement considerations. First is the risk and uncertainties. The risk and uncertainties is that inevitably surround events and circumstances shall be taken into account and reaching the best estimate of a provision. Risk describe variability of outcome. A risk adjustment may increase the amount at which a liability is measured. And then, as prudence dictates, caution is needed in making judgment under conditions of uncertainty so that income and assets are not overstated or expenses and liabilities are not understated. However, uncertainty does not justify the creation of excessive provision or a deliberate overstatement of liabilities. And then the second and the third one is the present value of obligation and future events. For present value of obligation, where the effect of the time value of money is material, the amount of provision shall be the present value of the expenditure expected to settle the obligation. The discount rate should be a pretax rate that reflects the current market assessment of the time value of money and the risk as specific to the liability. For future events that affect the amount required to settle an obligation shall be reflected in the amount of provision where there is sufficient evidence that the future events shall be occur. Such future events include new legislation and changes in technology. For number 4, the expected disposal of assets. Hindi yung ginaganon ko kanina. Ano yung kakayahan mo sacrifice na pagmamayari mo. It gains from expected disposal of assets shall not be taken into account in measuring a provision. Instead, an entity shall recognize gain on disposal at the time of disposal of the assets. In other words, any cash inflows from disposal are treated separately from the measurement of the provision. Reimbursements for a provision's settlement expenditure is recognized when it's likely to be received, treated as a separate asset, and not netted against the provision's estimated liability. However, the provision expense can be presented net of the reimbursement. Changes in provisions shall be reviewed at every end of the reporting period and adjusted to reflect the current best estimate. The provision shall be reversed if it's no longer probable that an outflow of economic benefits would be required to settle the obligation, where discounting is used. The carrying amount of the provision increases each period to reflect the passage of time. Okay, for use of provisions, a provision shall be used only for expenditures for which the provision was originally recognized. For example, a provision for plant dismantlement cannot be used to absorb environmental pollution, claims or warranty payments. If an expenditure is charged against a provision that was originally recognized for another purpose, that would camouflage the impact of two different events, thus distorting financial performance and possibly constituting financial reporting fraud. For future operating losses, provisions shall not be recognized for future operating losses. In other words, a provision for operating losses is not recognized because a past event creating a present obligation has not occurred. Contingent liability. A contingent liability is a possible obligation arising from a past event that is confirmed by uncertain future events. It is either probable or measurable, but not both. If the obligation is probable and measurable, it is not a contingent or contingent liability but recognized as a provision. Okay, so let's move on for treatment of contingent liability. A, possible disclosure only. B, probable but not measurable disclosure only. C, remote or remote need for disclosure. D, probable and measurable recognize a losses or losses and unestimated liability. The required disclosures for contingent liability are brief description of the nature of the contingent liability, an estimate of these financial effects. C. An indication of the uncertainties that exist. And D is the possibility of any reimbursement. For contingent asset, ang contingent asset naman is the possible asset that arises from past event and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrences or non-occurrences of uncertain future events. The treatment of contingent assets is these three: A. Probable disclosure only. B. Possible, no need for disclosure. C. Remote, no need for disclosure. The disclosure includes a brief description of the contingent asset and an estimate of its financial effects. Yes, that's it, and thank you for listening. But just for reminder or your review, the provision is ito yung in-estimate mo or yung mga future na goals or mga plano mo na dapat may sakutuparan, na dapat makatotohanan at hindi yung hula-hula lang. For contingent liability, ito naman yung possible obligation mo galing sa past events. Ibig sabihin, ito naman yung mga natutunan mo na dapat mo nang i-apply sa current or ang iyong present value for now. And yes, it is either probable or measurable. And kapag measurable lang siya, it's considered as contingent liability. Kapag probable naman siya, it is considered also contingent liability. But if If it's both, hindi na siya contingent liability. Tawag na sa kanya is provision kasi pinagsama ng probable at measurable. For assets naman is simple, just your pagmamayari. Ari-arian.